Hey everybody, we're here at E3 and I am in the CD Projekt Red booth to talk about Cyberpunk with...
Alvin Liu. Hi, hey everyone. I am a UI designer there. I actually moved from California to Poland to work on this exact game. And I'm super excited to be chatting with you guys today.
How is Poland?
It's colder than California, but the people are nice. It's a great place. Yeah, you can get around Europe super cheap. It's super awesome.
Cool. So I guess just general question before we get into the thick of Cyberpunk. This is a game that you guys announced forever ago that you've been showing at multiple E3s. How do you feel this E3? What's really different kind of about the vibe of where you're at with the game, I guess?
Yeah, so what we want to show this year was a lot of the gameplay approaches you could do, right? We want to let you be able to play the game how you want to play it, right? If you're familiar for a game Witcher 3, you know, one of my favorite games of all time, we had the open world and we had the super rich narrative, so we're still going to have that in Cyberpunk. What we want to show this time is that you're going to be able to play how you want, right? So you want to be the hacker pacifist who just kind of like came from maybe a corporate background and just trying to make money. They're not really trying to kill anyone. You can do that, right? Or you could be like the bloodthirsty guys, like augment themselves, you know, with all this like stuff all in their body and just run in and kill everyone. You can also do that in our game. And this year we just want to show more of that. And yeah.
So speaking about that freedom, and that is something you guys really showed off during the presentation and something we really kept coming back, I think, when we were discussing our thoughts on the presentation. A question that came to me, I think sometimes when you have so much variety, it kind of comes at the cost of quality in a way where, like basic things might suffer just because you can do so much and you have so much freedom. So what sort of steps are you taking to ensure things like melee combat or gunfights are satisfying despite the fact that you can do so many other things? You don't have to go that route all the time.
Yeah, that's actually a great question, and I actually have a story about that. So while we were developing one of our street stories, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but your objective there was to find someone, extract him, and get some information from him. Or you could just kill him. And actually what we found was that, so we built all these ways to sneak through and hack cameras and like, you know, take control and find him and do all this stuff. You could also go to the bartender and like chat him up and maybe, you know, get some information that way. But then the QA found this like open window like behind the wall, and he found this perfect path to throw a grenade and like bounces the exact way and just lands in his bedroom and kills him. And we were like, huh, you know what? Keep it, right? So it's like if you want to solve it that way, you do it. You don't get the bonus objectives, right? You didn't get the info. You didn't, you know, extract him and take him out or anywhere. But if you just want to like quickly kill him and be done with it, go ahead. Like we really want you to do it how you want to do it. And if your way to do it is like I just want to, you know, throw a little grenade, that's all the power to you.
So let's say I'm a really stubborn player and I want to just shoot everything all the time, no matter what. That's just my thing. How, I guess, let's say you take that path, you know, and you're playing this game for, let's say, 60 hours. How just is that one element going to change over time? I mean, is it just, is the variety going to come from the enemy designs? Is it going to come from the environments that you're fighting in? Like, how do you guys keep things interesting throughout the entire course of the game when you can do so many things?
Yeah, that's all of the above. So I'll talk about all three, right? So we'll talk about the enemy design, we'll talk about the environments, and we'll talk about your builds. The first, if you remember from our demo, we first encountered the animal gangs for the first time this time. And they're kind of like these like, you know, muscle heads of the future, right? You know, they actually have steroids or something they call juice that actually give them superhuman strength. And they will approach combat differently than, say, the Voodoo Boys or another hacking gang, right? Those guys are going to be more kind of like, you know, trying to get you from the distance or something. And there's a lot more gangs as well. If you remember from last year, we had the Scavengers and the Maelstrom as well. And just seeing how these different gangs interact with you, like combat-wise, it's pretty interesting. So the second one was the environment design, right? So we have a lot of different districts in Night City. The one you saw this time was kind of like a rundown, abandoned vibe. You know, you go into these abandoned malls, there's kind of like, you know, foliage and stuff growing in, and a lot of open spaces. But you can imagine another district we have, which is kind of more like a Japantown, so a lot of like narrow alleyways of like ramen shops and stuff. That's like a kind of different encounter. And finally, for the different builds, so in our game we have the core attributes, so like cool, you know, body and intelligence and stuff, but within these attributes, so for example, if you have maximum cool, you can pick sniper rifles or assassinations, and you can actually just level them up by themselves. So the more you use a sniper, the better you get at it. And if you want to pick up like a shotgun, you can actually even accelerate your skill in shotgun. I don't want to spoil that, but you know, you're in a world where you can download stuff into your brain, and you can go to training areas and firing ranges. And to that effect, you'll be able to experiment with different weapons and builds as well. And yeah, I think all of that combined, we know we're making a huge game, and we want people to be engaged through all of it. So yeah, I wouldn't worry.
So another thing that you kind of showed off during the presentation that we saw yesterday is you have these different backgrounds that you can pick for your created character. You had the nomad, you had the street kid, and you have or a corporate background. What made you decide on those three backgrounds specifically? Is that coming from the tabletop RPG? And how, I guess, dramatically different are all three of those backgrounds?
Right. So you actually nailed it. So the Nomad and the Corpo were actually classes in Cyberpunk, right? Mm-hmm. In the tabletop game, you could be a journalist, you could be a rock musician actually, and that's represented with Johnny Silverhand.
Nice.
It's harder in a computer game because in a tabletop game he's like, okay, we'll just talk about setting up a concert for 4 sessions straight. We have a bit more limitations of what we want to try to deliver with a video game, but we wanted to keep that essence of like many different people in a world, right? And to that effect, so we did that through life path. And the 3 life paths are the corpo, the corporate guy, who got fired from a job or something, and the nomad and the street kid. So corpos are like corpos in real life, but more extreme. A lot of them will buy cyberware that they can't afford because they need it to enhance their intelligence or something to work, and then they spend 40 years paying it off. And their aspirations like, oh, I can get the next model of my cyberware that I can't afford, and so I have to pay it for another 50 years. But that's kind of like what they want to do. The street kid, it's the guy or girl who grew up from the streets, right? They know how the gangs work. They're a bit more maybe okay with violence. I mean, it depends on how you want to play. And the nomad is kind of like the person on the outskirts, right? They have really strong family bonds, and they value freedom and independence a lot, right? So if you want to be the character that's like, yeah, I want to burn the city down, that's a pretty good choice for you.
If you do DLC down the line for Cyberpunk, is that maybe something that you would add? Is additional life paths like a Rockstar?
That's a good question. We're focused heavily on our main game right now.
Sure.
I think with true CDPR fashion, we're never going to charge for our DLC. We don't want to just nickel and dime everyone. But we're still focused on our main game, so I'm not exactly sure what our DLC plans are. But that's actually a great idea. That's really cool. You'll get a lot of the Rockstar kind of vibe from Johnny Silverhand in our game. But yeah, that could be interesting.
Do you have a favorite path, a life path between the 3 of them?
I like to play the weird character. There was a superhero game, and I made my character as plain as normal. You use the rifle. Okay. So I think my first playthrough, I'm going to be the corpo, and I'm going to be because when you think Cyberpunk, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a punk, but I'm be like, no, I'm going to be the straight edge guy. I'm just not going to get any cyberware. See how long that goes. I'm just going to be really smart. Really into engineering and talk about engineering stuff a little bit. But eventually I'll probably just have too much reputation and credits, and I'll unlock some new equipment and stuff. One cool feature we have actually is that the more reputation and street cred you gain in an area, the more offers and secret stuff they'll offer you, right? Which makes sense because hey, I heard you saved my daughter or something, reputation, and your reputation's really high in Watson. So hey, I actually have this special reserve of items. Hey, do you want to check it out? And I think eventually, maybe I'll get some cool cyber and I'll just okay, I'll cave in. All right, I'm going to start augmenting myself, or and maybe I'll go into I don't know, swords or something. I think those are always very cool. Yeah.
I like the idea of you going against the grain by playing it so straight, which is kind of funny. But you talked about street cred and how you build that up and how you can get more opportunities available to you. How many different ways, I guess, are there to earn street cred? Is it something where it's okay, I have to do a pretty major mission or task, or are there going to be kind of smaller opportunities for you to bump up that cred a little bit?
Yeah, so some insight into kind of how games are developed. One thing that the game designers found a lot that happened in Witcher 3, if you played it, was that a lot of people were doing all the side missions because the side mission content was really awesome. There was really cool stories there. And then they were out leveling some sections, right? They sometimes got a reward, oh, but I'm already 2 levels higher. So one of our approaches to handle that in Cyberpunk is that if you do a lot of these side optional missions, you earn street cred rather than your normal levels at a much different ratio. So the idea is that as you accomplish these missions in different districts, you'll be able to level up your street cred that way. And another mechanic we have is that we have a concept called the Fixer, which you might have seen last year from Dexter Deshawn. They're the kind of the person who knows everyone. They organize the contracts for you. They're kind of like a mob boss, maybe in a way.
Sure.
They also help you control and how you unlock different street cred missions, right? So say you go into a new district for the first time, you got to make contact with a fixer there, right? So then you know, like, hey, I'll put you in contact with some people who need help, and it's for me that's like kind of really immersive, right? It's not like you just go into an area and some guy approaches like, hey, help me, right?
Save me.
Yeah. It makes more sense if there's like some middleman who's like, you know, helping people with odd jobs, and you go find them or her, and then they like, okay, yeah, I heard that this guy needs some help.
Cool. There's one thing that I really liked in the presentation that we saw last night is I love just when game companies not only put so much work into their world building and being like, okay, well, here's the history of this particular building, here's the history of this group. It's that you get all that information when you're playing the game in a way that feels natural, I guess. And during the presentation, the presenter would stop and be like, hey, here's what's going on with this guy or this place or whatever. I worry sometimes when you have so much information, it can be hard to present in a convincing way. It can be hard to present without it feeling like, okay, the game is just like stopping me and giving me all this information. And so I guess, what are all of the different ways that you kind of get acclimated into the world in a way that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. So the first thing we're working on is that we have a codex system, and that's kind of opposite what you talked about. But yeah, we're building a system where it's kind of like the Wikipedia of everything. Okay. So you'll be able to learn a lot that way. But this is a very optional piece of information. It's for the people who they really want to read about this, the company behind who made the cyberware, and that is not necessary to complete the game. The other part is that we're really being intelligent with the amount of slang and street jargon we introduce. One of our very first development builds, it was just like slang after slang after slang after slang after slang, right? It was something out of like a B movie or something. Sure. And we found that it was kind of hard to follow. Yeah. So we kind of culled it down, we introduced it occasionally where it would make sense. And so we are aware of this problem of like overloading people. And at the same time, I think at the core, Cyberpunk is a very kind of modern world approach. Right? You see elements of the world and you see it maybe gone a bit wrong, right? I can empathize with the animals gang. Like I see, go to the gym. I get it. You want to be, look good, right. But it's easy to cheat, right? Like I just want to put in some cyberware and make the whole process easier. And I emphasize with that. And even the Voodoo Boys, I kind of emphasize with. They're very a spiritual gang where they're like, I want to be uploaded into the net, and then if I'm in the cyberspace, I live forever, I guess, right? That's kind of cool. And you get this fundamental level of understanding, kind of reflecting some human traits, and then we kind of add some more interesting elements on top of it.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't even think about, where conveying a lot of how this thing functions makes so much sense because it's based in our reality, and then it's just kind of taking that and extending it a little bit, which is really, really cool. But a big thing for me, Cyberpunk, I think one of the things that you keep emphasizing is how much freedom you have, how much choice there is, and how much your decisions matter. And that is something that I think a lot of games promise, but don't really quite deliver on. It's kind of presented very vaguely, but a lot of the actual decisions end up feeling superficial, where it's like, okay, well, basically everybody gets the same experience except for these 2 or 3 things that don't really impact the story all that much. So I guess, could you offer kind of more concrete details on hey, if you make completely different choices than me, just based on how you build your character and the background you pick, how that's going to differentiate a playthrough from somebody else who chooses something completely different?
Yeah, so insight into some of our developer, behind the scenes stuff is that when you load up a quest and you just want to play the quest without the first 10 hours or whatever, we have a developer system where you get to pick what happened before and hey, did I save this person, did I not save this person, did I romance this person, did I not romance this person, and those lists get 20 plus sometimes. I'm I need to test something, just whatever. So a lot of our designers, which I think is awesome, they're planning for all this. They're like, oh, what if this person is dead? And then they build it into their actual design. So at the core of CDPR DNA, they're always thinking about this. They're always like, how do I make it this my experience? And it's just embedded in how we design everything. So, yeah.
I have to ask, that got me thinking, did you ever see how one of your coworkers was playing the game and it maybe changed your opinion on them a little bit? Or oh man, they're kind of rough?
I think all the time. I mean, but also they can just be like, oh yeah, I'm just testing the psychopath. I'm just whatever.
Yeah.
I think the most gruesome thing I ever saw was, you probably saw our dismemberment system.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So someone was like picking up limbs and like kind of stacking them up like to make like a limb human box, and it was like, okay, what are you doing? It's like, oh, I don't know, I'm just making sure the limbs don't clip through each other. It's like, okay, all right.
Um, in throughout Cyberpunk's presentation, a lot of the world is very bleak. You kind of get this sensation where it's like, man, anyone could betray me at any moment. And I think that was definitely showed, especially during this year's presentation, with kind of how the story of the mission played out. And I think when you have a world that can be so bleak, like the world presented in Cyberpunk, is it ever difficult injecting humor and levity in a way that doesn't feel forced, where it's like, okay, well, these are the kind of jokes these characters would actually make. We're not just doing it because we need to crack a joke here.
Right. And first of all, I'm glad you noticed that, actually. One of the cool things I think in Cyberpunk, compared to The Witcher 3, is our first-person perspective really lets you feel the danger.
Mm-hmm.
We did a really strong effort to make it feel like dialogue and interactions were part of the world, right? In The Witcher 3, for example, if you knew you were not in combat, the camera would kind of zoom out, you get kind of like black, movie-style bars, and then like, okay, combat's going to start, so you zoom back in, the bars go away.
Yeah.
This game is like, no, I can pull a gun, in a second and start shooting people, right? So the danger is like super high. But to your question, I think actually some of my funniest moments in all gaming was probably, spoilers, was probably like the Kaer Morhen scene in Witcher 3, where they dress up and stuff. And I think the writers are just amazing at our studio, right? They know, like, we have a super tense moment with Kaer Morhen. There's a lot of, it's a very pivotal moment, but they find a moment to, add the human element, right? They have the joking and they have the family kind of moment, and I think you would expect the same here. And to that effect, our characters are also very layered as well. I don't want to spoil, Johnny Silverhand stuff, but he's got more dimensions than just like, asshole that wants to, burn the world down.
Kind of a comparison coming off of The Witcher 3, where you're playing a named character, where you're taking the role of somebody that's very well known in this world, Geralt, whereas in Cyberpunk 2077, you're making your own character. I guess what do you do to not make them feel like kind of this like lifeless drone that's just kind of observing everything? Like, how do you make it feel like they have their own agency and like people are responding to them in a realistic way?
Yeah, so we touched on this earlier, but the life path system actually helps a lot. We know that, hey, this guy has a corpo background, so he understands what it might be like to interact with different corporations. And also to that effect, this is a really cool thing we can do this time around, is that because you're making your character and you're not playing Geralt, we have a lot of different options, for romance, a lot of interactions you can do for interacting with people. And I think that's really cool, right? It's like in Witcher 3, you had to pick, Geralt or Triss or whatever. But this time you can be like, no, hey, I want to play, someone who's like homosexual or something. Sure. And go ahead, you can do that. I think that's going to open it up for a lot, and it'll be really cool.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for sitting down and going into so much detail about Cyberpunk 2077. Just so to end this off, when can we expect to see Cyberpunk? When is it coming out, and what platforms is it going to be available on?
Yep, so it's going to be out April 16th, 2020. We're going to be on PC, Xbox, and PS4.
Great. Thank you so much.